Okay. Good. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. Great. Okay. I'm going to start screen sharing again. Resume screen sharing. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I think more people will be joining us as we go along. This is Understanding Dementia, a meeting for professionals. I'm Jed Levine. I am now the president emeritus. I had been president and CEO for several years. And before that, I was executive vice president, director of programs. I've actually been at this organization since 1990 as a staff member, so a long time. And before that, I volunteered. So I have a long history here. And today, what we're going to do in the next 2 hours is really kind of a basic introduction to Alzheimer's and dementia, go over some of the basics of understanding the disease, both from the perspective of what happens in the brain, how it affects the individual, and how it affects the caregiver, what the caregiver experience is. And we'll be talking a little bit about what's happening in research, because there's some very exciting and hopefully promising things happening in research. And we also will be talking about kind of how do you, what kinds of supports and resources are available for individuals living with the disease and for their family and professional caregivers. So with that, let me, okay, so I want to remind for those of you who are New York State licensed social workers, you can earn 2 CEUs. You can either contact the helpline, which is probably how you signed up for this, at 646-744-2900 and request the CEU application form. I'm going to ask you to fill out a short questionnaire and then return it to Caring Kind with a check for $40. Or you can call and we can take a credit card over the phone. And then everybody will receive a short questionnaire and evaluation form for the program. So I ask everybody to fill that out and send it back. So let's start at the beginning. And I think there's still confusion out there about what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So dementia is a constellation of different symptoms that result from some underlying medical condition. There are 4 primary areas that are affected in dementia. One of them, I think most of us think of initially when we think about dementia, is memory. Initially short-term, and short-term memory becomes more and more impaired as the disease progresses, and later on, longer-term memory. So even later on, people are not able to report things of personal historical nature. When they got married, where they got married, where they met their wife, those kinds of things that you think people would, should probably remember and recognize. But it's not just memory alone. It's all areas of cognition, of thinking, planning, what the neurologists call executive function, that begins to break down as the disease progresses. The ability to identify a task, see what steps need to be done to complete it, what are the consequences of completing it or not completing it. And so there's that planning component is disrupted pretty early in the disease, actually. And eventually other areas of reasoning, judgment, language is affected significantly. The ability to both write and to understand the written word, the ability to put your thoughts and feelings into words and speech. All of that is part of this deterioration that happens when somebody has a disease that causes dementia. And difficult, I think one of the more difficult aspects of this is not so much the cognitive challenges, although they are difficult enough, but it's the behavioral challenges. It's the mood and personality changes. Somebody who was formerly very gregarious and outgoing is now kind of more fearful of going out. Or conversely, the person who was always pretty, kept to themselves is now, always seeking company and very uncomfortable being by themselves. It can manifest itself in different ways. And lastly, the one thing I think that we don't think about often enough when we talk about Alzheimer's and other dementias or dementia-causing diseases is that it does have a physical component, that the individual loses the ability to motor plan, to if you ever have asked anybody who is middle stage or later to get into a car or a cab, they have difficulty knowing where to put their body. They might have difficulty knowing where to put their arms in a sleeve of a sweater or shirt. There are gait changes. There are reflex changes. There are motor changes in terms of other changes in terms of walking. So balance might be affected. So all of those, I think, are things that we don't normally think about when we look at dementia. So dementia is caused by many, many, many different causes. Alzheimer's disease is the most common. Vascular dementia, we're going to get into the definitions of all of these in a few minutes. And dementia with Lewy bodies is considered both to be probably the second most common cause. And frontotemporal dementia is rarer. We're going to go into that as well. But most individuals have some elements of both of Alzheimer's disease pathology in their brain, vascular dementia changes, vascular changes in their brain, and dementia with Lewy bodies, some evidence of Lewy bodies in their brain. So it's almost always a mixed picture. And whichever the predominant pathology is, then that will determine what the disease is called or what caused it primarily. So it's not always such a clear cut picture, is what I'm trying to say. And then there are causes like malnutrition and dehydration that can cause confusion, disorientation, fogginess, especially in the very hot weather when people are not drinking enough. And vitamin B12 deficiency is a known cause of confusion, disorientation, these cognitive changes. I'll tell you, in my 40-something years of doing this, I have rarely seen somebody with a vitamin B12 deficiency, but nonetheless, it's there. It does exist. Underactive or hyperactive thyroid, all of which are treatable, by the way, these causes. And then medication interactions. And those of you who are on the call, I'm sure you all work in geriatrics or with older adults, and you're aware that older adults take more medications, more pills, more drugs than any other population. And sometimes those medications can interact with each other and cause unwanted effects, one of which might be confusion, disorientation, problems processing and thinking. So it's important to do a kind of a medication screen if somebody's being evaluated for dementia. So what is the difference between normal aging and dementia? And I think this is something that we're still trying to get a handle on. Most people, as they age, will experience some change in how they think, but it's more often in the speed of how they process information and perhaps in their ability to attend. But it doesn't affect their functioning. So in order to have diagnosis of dementia, it has to affect functioning, has to be severe enough to affect functioning. Now, for instance, occasionally we all misplace our keys. I actually walked out of the house the other day without my keys, which was a little alarming, but I knew where they were. And once I got them, I knew what to do with them. We all have had the tip of the tongue sensation of, forgetting the right word or can't think of the word. But individuals with dementia have progressive challenges with language and conversation and having that two-way dialogue. We all might forget the day occasionally. You wake up on a Sunday and you think it's Monday and you have to go to work and then you're relieved. Oh, great, it's Sunday. But in dementia, that momentary disorientation is, it's more than that. It is really losing track of time and losing track of the date and the season and the month. And I've had people with dementia tell me that it really is that time becomes distorted in a very significant way. So let me, it's much more than just, temporarily forgetting the day or an appointment. Let me also say that this is a 2-hour program. So, it's going to be, we're going to take breaks. I'm going to ask you to use the chat function. And I think somebody has already done that.
This is
okay.
Informative.
So you can do that.
Yeah.
And also just want to remind you.
Another working now.
Yeah,
we need
Jenny,
to rush
Jenny,
for us
I'm going to mute you. Okay. So use the chat function if you have a question about a specific area that I've gone over. Let me also, say that if we were in a room together in person, I'd be asking all of you kind of where you're, where you work and what population do you work with. But unfortunately, I think there are quite a few. Fortunately, I think, there's so many of us that are not able to do that on Zoom. But you'll get the information. Okay. Okay, so how do we diagnose the disease? And this is something that's really become a very standard approach. And we always encourage that individuals go to one of the major diagnostic centers or to a neurologist. Primary care doctors can identify that there's an issue. They don't really have the time. They don't really have the experience. They're not, to do a complete diagnostic assessment. So we encourage people to maybe start with their individual, primary care doc, but then move to one of the major diagnostic centers, which has its own problems because the waiting lists now, and I don't know if any of you work at some of those centers, but the waiting lists, from my experience, is that it can be up to 6 months or more before somebody can get an appointment for a comprehensive evaluation for Alzheimer's or other dementias. So it is a differential diagnosis. You want to get a family history, see if there are any relatives who experienced cognitive changes as they grew older. It's a physical exam and complete blood work, often neuropsych testing to get a baseline of where memory and cognition and personality, and then brain imaging as well, both PET scans and MRI scans. You can't see Alzheimer's on a scan, but you can measure change in the rate of atrophy of the brain. You can measure even now the volume of the hippocampus, which is the area of the brain that is responsible for forming and holding memories. And actually the diagnosis, the clinical diagnosis, is really one that's now 90 to 95% accuracy. Now there are actually blood tests now that we can show some of the characteristic, we can identify some of the characteristic pathologies in the blood test, but it's not really being used widely outside of a research arena. So Alzheimer's disease, often abbreviated as AD, is the most common cause of dementia, representing 60 to 80% of all dementia cases. It is unfortunately progressive. It is a degenerative disease of the brain, which causes changes in memory, thinking, behavior, and physical functioning. And I think it's those areas of behavior and the physical functioning, being able to be independent in managing the activities of daily living and the instrumental activities of daily living, those higher level activities that require planning, is really challenging both for the individual and for their family member who is going to be providing care for them. Alzheimer's has 3 phases. One is preclinical. So there are changes happening in the brain, but their individual is not experiencing any symptoms. And this preclinical phase can happen perhaps 15 to 20 years before the onset of clinical symptoms. There's also MCI due to Alzheimer's disease. MCI is mild cognitive impairment. We'll go into what that means in a moment. And then you go into the dementia phase of Alzheimer's disease. And here there are changes that are profound enough that you're seeing some mild changes in terms of thinking and function and memory, and moves to moderate and then to severe. So it is a huge issue. This is, in my mind, the public health issue for the 21st century. Over 500,000 people are estimated to live with Alzheimer's disease. Notice I said live with it. And every 65 seconds, another American develops Alzheimer's disease. Not is diagnosed with it, because probably only half, or maybe even considerably fewer than half, actually get a diagnosis. It is a disease, and although there was just a paper that came out today that said it's probably 1 in 10 Americans over age 65 have Alzheimer's. So I'm going to have to update this. I just got this paper today, the work of Jennifer Manley at Columbia University, and 1 in 3 aged 85 and over. So clearly, this is a disease of older adults, and Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death. However, according to another study, it's listed as the 3rd leading cause of death for older adults. And it is primarily a disease of aging, but 1 to 3% estimated are under the age of 65. And when that happens, and we call that early onset Alzheimer's disease, not necessarily early stage, but early onset. The age of onset is under the age of 65 or 60. The impact for the family, for the individual, for their retirement planning, for their financial well-being. They have kids who are still in high school. Yeah, I'm going to put the live transcript on now. So the impact for that population is different than it is when somebody is 85 and experiencing these challenges. All right, let's move on. By 2050, we estimate that approximately 14 million Americans will have Alzheimer's disease. And 1 in 5 New Yorkers will either have or be caring for somebody who has Alzheimer's disease. So it's a huge issue. And actually, I'm going to be presenting to the New York City Council sometime soon, next month or so, just about what to do when they have constituents who are experiencing changes in how they're thinking and so that's exciting. Then the city has a caregiver program. That's quite good. We work with them. The City Department for the Aging is one of our longest partners, or partners of long standing in helping us. So understanding Alzheimer's. So in order to understand this disease of the brain, it's important to recognize, and some of you, this might be a review, that there are 100 billion nerve cells called neurons in the brain. And there are gaps between those neurons, 100 trillion gaps. And that's where the disease process kind of happens, both within the cells themselves and in the gap between the neurons. This standard pathology actually exists from the time when Dr. Alois Alzheimer in 1906 first identified the disease and described it, and found these hallmark pathologies of the disease. So, we've come a long way, but we're still using these 2 pathological findings as kind of the hallmarks of the disease. So there is an overaccumulation of plaque. Plaque is a tarry substance that gets built up between the cells, and it is made up of a protein, beta amyloid, and there are many different variants of beta amyloids, and some of which are quite toxic to the brain cells themselves and lead to cell death. The other finding is that there are these neurofibrillary tangles. Those are strands of protein called tau, which we need to maintain proper cell structure, and that collapses. So that's within the brain cell itself. So beta amyloid accumulates between the cells and the tangles within the cells themselves, leading to this, which is, and as you can see on the left, you see a normal age-matched sample to an Alzheimer brain. And again, what do you see as the difference here? Anybody, you can take yourself off mute and just, mention what you see as the difference here between those two brains.
Shira, looks like the brain with Alzheimer's is kind of like shriveled or shrinking,
Right.
maybe compressed.
It is. Definitely it's shriveled. It looks much less healthy, doesn't it? Anything else? Anybody?
The shape and the size of it, basically.
Right. So the sulci and the gyri, or the sulci and the gyri, the spaces, there's not as much brain matter as there, and they're much wider. And it definitely looks overall quite shrunken. And it looks darker, and it looks almost harder. It's a good observation. I'm not sure that it is harder, actually, but it definitely looks, not as robust and healthy. This is a very important image when we're working with family members and when we're working with home care workers, and even, and with you, because it shows that there actually is deterioration in the brain on gross anatomy that, often, and I hear from family members, especially in the early stages, if he only tried harder, if he concentrated harder, if he wasn't so distracted, but this shows that there's actually changes within the brain itself. And I think it allows for more empathy in some ways for the family member who's looking at this. So let me also say that whenever I do this with professionals, I recognize that you're not only professionals, but you have family members, and probably a half to 70% of you are concerned about or know a relative or have had a relative who have had Alzheimer's disease. So I just want to make you aware that I'm aware of that as well. Oops, why isn't this going? There we are. Now, people often ask me, what are the, how can we avoid it? And that's a good question. And if I knew that answer, I'd be sitting here with the Nobel Prize. I don't have the Nobel Prize yet. I don't think I'm going to get it. But we do understand so much more about risk factors and reducing the risk factors for cognitive impairment as we grow older. So it's many, many different interactions between our genetics and other environmental and lifestyle risk factors. So certainly there are some things we can't change. So age is the greatest risk factor. As you age, your chances of developing the disease are greater. And aging, and I'm talking to a bunch of professionals who are in the world of aging services, aging is a good thing. I don't know why we're all surprised when that 50th birthday hits, for those of you who have hit that already and say, oh my God, I'm 50, when did that happen? Well, what did you expect to happen? And aging healthfully and fully and, with purpose and meaning in your life, it's a great, it's a wonderful thing. And we kind of stigmatize aging, and we live in an ageist society. So it's tough to kind of look at or provide a positive image of aging in American society. We're trying to, promote that. And even with dementia, we can show that people living with dementia can still live with dementia and thrive and, have all of their feelings about what's happening to it, but they can still participate in life and still live a full life. So I think there's the stigma against dementia is also connected to the stigma against aging. So I'll get off my soapbox. So anyway, so aging is the greatest risk factor. We can't do anything about that other than try to age as healthfully as possible. Having a first-degree relative with Alzheimer's disease increases the risk, but doesn't predict that you're going to get the disease. There are two different types of genes, deterministic genes versus risk genes. And it's, it's only in that early onset familial type of Alzheimer's disease, where there is a very clear genetic pattern. We've been able to identify the genes that are involved in that. So for the rest of us who have late onset Alzheimer's disease, the risk genes are, there's a genetic profile that increases your risk of developing the disease, but it doesn't actually predict that you're going to. And the other interesting thing is that race is a factor, because we know that African Americans develop dementia at double the rate of older whites, and Latinos at 1.5 times, and perhaps even greater than that, have a greater risk of developing cognitive impairment as they age. Probably is related to those lifestyle factors, because there's no genetic basis for this, is that heart health is brain health. You've all heard the heart healthy message. Good, healthy nutrition, low fat proteins, mostly plant-based diet, a primarily plant-based diet, healthy fats, a lot of exercise, good sleep hygiene. We're now finding that 7 hours, or I can't say the exact number of hours, it differs for everybody, but I think on average they're saying 7 hours of sleep a night is really good. And I remember speaking to one of the researchers years ago, guy from Harvard, Rudy Tanzi, who said that he really changed his sleep pattern, because he was one of those guys who prided himself on sleeping only 4 hours a night, and then realized it's not so good for your brain. So getting good sleep, then having those healthy numbers. What do I mean by that? Keeping blood sugar under control, especially if you're pre-diabetic or diabetic. Keeping your cholesterol under control. Keeping your hypertension under control, and keeping your cholesterol levels under control. And so there's mounting evidence that if we can control those elements, we can really reduce the risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. I'm not comfortable saying that we have a way of preventing it yet. I think risk reduction is a more appropriate term. The other thing we're finding is that loneliness and social isolation contributes to dementia, and that remaining socially and cognitively active and engaged is important. So going to programs with other people, exercising with other people. There's some evidence that actually ballroom dancing is one of the best things you can do. I remember Dr. Peter Davies from Northwell saying that, it is physical, it is cognitive, you have to learn steps and remember them, and it's social, because you're not dancing alone, you're dancing with at least one partner, and if not, in a group. So it's a good activity. And then the sensory issues, which are so common with older adults. So we all have changes in our vision as we grow older, and that there's some evidence that those people who have had cataract surgery, there's some evidence of reduced risk for dementia. And interestingly, there's more and more study on this. There's a Dr. Frank Lin out of, I think it's Jefferson Medical School. It's in Philadelphia, talking about the role of hearing loss, especially unaided hearing loss. The theory being that having to strain to hear and to follow conversation actually taxes the brain and reduces the ability of the brain to function. It also might be related to that social isolation, because the less you hear, the less you're going to be involved with other people. So it's an interesting observation. And whoops, let me go back for a minute. And now that hearing aids are available over the counter for a modest or affordable price, and there are some larger studies now of looking at the role of hearing loss in developing dementia. So something to think about. Something to think about with all of your clients if they ask them about hearing loss, so you don't often ask, and if they are using a hearing aid. So one of my favorite images, these cognitive changes in Alzheimer's and other dementias. It's not an on-off switch. It's not like you're functioning here as a,
bothering you, Mary?
oops, Elena, I'm going to turn you off here. There you go. Yes. I think I muted her. It's more like a dimmer switch. So there are moments during the day and perhaps during the week where you're doing a little bit brighter and, sharper. And then perhaps when someone is tired or not feeling well, or they're just woken up from a nap, maybe they're not quite as cognitively, sharp. So it's important also because it means that that individual, I think our overall image of somebody with dementia is one that focuses on all of the losses, all of the changes, and not looking at what is left and the abilities and the strengths of that individual. So this is an important image. The disease, unfortunately, is progressive, and we don't have, we have medications that are manage some of the symptoms for a period of time for some individuals. We don't really have anything yet. We're working on it. Not me personally, but the research world is working on it to perhaps halt the progression at early stage or the mild cognitive impairment stage. And so that people don't have to progress to the stage of greater impairment. But on average, early stage lasts 1 to 5 years, middle stage 2 to 10 years, and late stage 1 to 7 years, sometimes even longer than that if they get really good care. So what is mild cognitive impairment? Mild cognitive impairment is a situation where there is difficulty thinking and some changes in memory, but it's mild, as the name implies, and the individual is still able to live independently and function independently. So these changes are not severe enough to interfere with their independence. However, it increases the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And not everybody who has MCI, by the way, goes on to develop Alzheimer's disease. Some people stabilize at a certain level, and some people actually improve. And so there's some question and some study going on about what's going on with MCI. In the early stage, here it is clear that there is short-term memory loss. Person can't remember what they had for breakfast yesterday or today. There is there's greater confusion in orientation, generally to place and time, not to self. The individual still has, nor to person. They still can identify other people in their environment. Difficulty following complex instructions, and difficulty performing regular tasks, those usual tasks, and learning new things, problems with money and financial management. I remember, and I led an early stage support group for close to 10 years. And I remember one of my clients, Mary, talked about trying to write a birthday check for her granddaughter. And she had difficulty just translating the number, whatever amount she was giving her, to both the numerical symbol and then the words that represented that numerical number, and went through several checks before she kind of got it right. Loss of initiative and motivation, apathy. And there's a lot more study now in the role of apathy in Alzheimer's disease. Apathy is a symptom. And a lot of it, I think, stems from the cognitive impairment, because I think once something is planned for somebody or they're given a pathway to do something, they can really enjoy it and really participate. They have trouble initiating it because it's a lot of cognitive steps that we might not recognize that part of our normal cognitive activity. And difficulty performing regular tasks, things like shopping, things like meal planning, doing the laundry. And again, Mary from my early stage group, who was early onset, she was in her 50s, had to give up a job as an executive assistant to a major, to the CEO of a major corporation. Said that just doing the laundry she would have to think very carefully about what she had to do, separate the clothes, get the quarters, because it was still a time when people were using machines that used quarters in her apartment building, make sure she had the laundry detergent and the softener, make sure she had her keys to get back into the apartment. And by the time that was done, she was exhausted, because it just took so much more thought than it did for those of us who just do this, without a lot of conscious thought. And poor judgment. Poor judgment which is why people with early stage can be people who are subject to and victims of financial scams, other kinds of scams. So we see that, a lot, because they don't have the judgment to determine whether something is, too good to be true or not. In the early stage, here, the individual still has strong abilities. They can understand the implications of their disease. They can participate in decision-making and should be encouraged to participate in decision-making and planning. They can still identify and articulate their feelings. And often they're living independently, perhaps with a little more support, external support, but they can still live independently. Here, the concerns, oops, I'm sorry. Stop. Here, the concerns are for autonomy, maintaining their independence, doing what you can to help them maintain their independence and their sense of self-esteem and their dignity. I had an aunt who was she was a leader in her community. She had been a second grade teacher for, 40 years, leader in the world of education in the town she lived in. And when she was diagnosed, the diagnosis was such a blow to her self-esteem, and she couldn't connect with that and kind of understand that this was happening to her. And she railed against it. It was really difficult for her. And you want to, across all the stages, you want to maintain a sense of human dignity and respect. In the middle stage, here, the deficits are absolutely no longer questionable. In the early stage, if you meet somebody socially, you might not think that there's anything wrong because you're not spending that much time with them or giving them something challenging to do. But here, in the middle stage, the individual is having increased memory loss and confusion, difficulty thinking logically, organizing their thoughts, increased difficulty with those multi-step tasks that I just mentioned, household chores, and especially, meal preparation, food shopping, bill paying, that kind of thing. And there is confabulation. So confabulation is when an individual, when they can't remember something, they kind of make up a fact. So a classic example from my past is one of our support group leaders used to talk about his wife, who also had been a teacher. And when he came home from work, and clearly she had been retired for several years, he would ask her, what has she done? And she said, oh, the kids were great today. They really, they had a great time in class. And she was just kind of making it up out of her own history, in a sense. Problems with recognition of individuals, no longer recognizing family members, looking at their 55-year-old son and saying, it's my brother, because he looks like my brother and I can't possibly have a 55-year-old son because I'm not that old. Increased communication difficulties, trouble putting, as I said, putting their thoughts and feelings into words, reading, and both receptive and expressive communication difficulties, mood swings and changes. Often those mood swings and the behavioral issues stem from an inability to articulate what the need is. And so out of their frustration, their behavioral issues or their frustration is expressed through action rather than through words. And they're labeled as people who have, challenging behaviors or quote, difficult behaviors. It's really more of a increased communication difficulty than anything else. Disinhibition, which happens in some of the other diseases perhaps more commonly. Hallucinations and delusions can happen. Almost always these are not auditory hallucinations, like happens with people who are schizophrenic. These are hallucinations that are more visual. And I remember somebody in my group, and I think she had Lewy body disease, who used to report seeing little men on her TV at night. But she found it very comforting. She liked the company, and there was no reason to treat it because she wasn't disturbed. There were other people who find the hallucinations quite disturbing. What's that man doing in my house? Or where did these dogs come from? Where did all these little animals come from? So depending upon the individual and their response to the hallucinations, delusions are a fixed thought that somebody thinks is real. They have to, common delusion is that the partner or the spouse is an imposter. Bring back the good Rose. I want the good Rose. I don't want you. Or I have to go to work because they're waiting for me in the office. Or somebody who always played, the organ at church is waking up on Tuesday at 3 a.m. thinking, I've got to get to church because the congregation is waiting for me. We're going to have a service. And so these kinds of fixed delusions, very challenging to deal with. And then the issue of sundowning, which happens between the hours of, let's say, 3 or 4, more into 6 or 7, where there is increased agitation, increased restlessness, increased disorganized thinking in the afternoon and the late evening. There's there are multiple theories about why this happens. We've been working with a group in Phoenix, Arizona, called the Beatitudes Campus, where we've successfully, where they have successfully pretty much reduced sundowning to almost zero by limiting and regulating stimulation in the environment, by addressing pain, by addressing the normal circadian rhythms. And if somebody is tired, instead of making them sit up in an uncomfortable chair, letting them lie down for a few minutes or a half hour, kind of makes sense kind of things. It's all part of our palliative care approach, which we'll talk about later. So, but this sundowning can be quite distressing. And there are more motor problems, more motor planning problems as the disease progresses. And what I call pseudo-incontinence. It's not truly incontinence of bowel and bladder. It's like they're getting a message that you have to go, but they have trouble because they're a little disoriented, can't find the location of the toilet. And once they're there, they're not quite sure what to do. And so the mechanics of toileting. So helping somebody, either by putting somebody on a toileting schedule on a regular basis and helping them with the mechanics of toileting both before and after in terms of cleaning up and hand washing, I think is, we can really reduce the use of incontinence supplies. It takes a lot of work and a lot of energy. And unfortunately, a lot of, residential facilities, and I don't know if any of you work in a residential facility, but it's, it takes a lot, but it can be done. And lastly, the issue of wandering, which is where somebody gets out of a controlled, safe environment and is seeking to go somewhere. And it's purposeful for them. And it's almost as if they have an internal map that they want to follow. It is dangerous. We know that if, in past studies, that if an individual with dementia is missing for more than 24 hours, there's a close to 50% chance that they will either never be found or found seriously harmed or deceased. And so we've created a program, I created a program here in 1990 that addresses this issue and been very successful in identifying people when they are lost. So anyway, those are just some of the middle stage symptoms. As we move on, the middle stage considerations are that the individual can still participate in modified activities. They might not be able to tell you, I want to do this, but if you give them a choice, do you want to play cards or do a puzzle? Do you want to help me with the, would you help me with the meal preparation? Or not, meal preparation is kind of a amorphous term or not a specific term. Can you help me chop the vegetables or peel the potatoes or, you know, set the table? Being more specific in our language, I think, is always helpful. And here, the middle considerations or concerns for that person at the middle stage is a loss of control, their own frustration at their inability to do what they want to do or used to be able to do, fear of abandonment, which affects that caregiver a lot. And we hear this from caregivers that as the disease progresses, I remember one wife saying to me, she felt like her husband was just Velcroed onto her. She couldn't get a break. He needed her as kind of an emotional, landmark and place to connect and a place to anchor him. And clearly safety is a major concern. Here, that individual is no longer safe living alone, needs full-time support, actually. As the disease progresses. And it's hard to contemplate if you're also concerned about a relative, but here the individual is losing a lot of language and a lot of ability to respond. And as the disease progresses, there might just be a few utterances, just that kind of thing. Minimal recognition of family or self. Let me just back up into the middle stage again for a second, because one of the things that also problems with recognition is also difficulty with mirrors. Some individuals have a real fear of mirrors. Other people, and I ran the first adult day program for people with dementia in New York City many years ago. And I remember one of my clients who used to go into the bathrooms and have this long conversation with that woman in the mirror. And I'd ask her, who is that? And she said, well, that's my sister. And she was very, she was delighted to see her sister. And it was, very pleasant and meaningful for her. It was not actually a bad activity. But some people, another of our clients who was in one of our early stage programs, had a real fear of mirrors. And unfortunately, he lived in an apartment building where the lobby was mirrored. So getting in and out of the house was really terrifying for him. And for some individuals, we recommend making environmental changes or adaptations to cover mirrors if people are afraid of that image in the mirror or no longer recognize themselves. Okay. Okay. In the late stages here, there's minimal recognition of family or self, but there is always, and I think this stays to the end, there is an emotional, you can connect emotionally with people. They will respond to kindness and to caring. And whether they recognize it as their daughter or granddaughter who's being soothing and comforting and caring. And there might be some recognition on a voice to some extent, I believe. So, it's really challenging. As the disease progresses, especially if people are having difficulty with, the motoric planning and walking and balance, they might become more sedentary and eventually bedbound. Although there are studies that show, I think, that have given enough support and use of assistive devices and other things with support. so the individual knows how to use it, they can actually, if they're kept walking, they can maintain the ability to ambulate for a long time. And then there are eating and swallowing challenges and difficulties. Here you do have true incontinence, and the individual is reliant on somebody else for all of their activities of self-care. So, which is not to say that sometimes if you put a brush in somebody's hand and start helping them brush their own hair, that they might be able to continue that and get the pleasure and the satisfaction of doing that. So just want to qualify that piece. And here the late stage considerations is that the individual, although I'm sure many of you have seen people who are sitting there with closed eyes and they look completely cut off, there is still some sensory awareness of their surroundings, especially through sound and touch and smell, so that you can reach individuals through those senses, and also really profound response to music. And we participated in a program called Music and Memory, which provided iPods, which are now extinct. Nobody uses them anymore. But it was individualized playlists for people who were both originally working with people who were in residential care, nursing homes. But then we did a program bringing this to 100 families living in the community, 100 individuals with moderate to late stage Alzheimer's, and using music that is important to them, that they recognize, that they knew from the time that they were little, from the time that they were kind of preteens. That's actually the area that time of your life, that music is well learned. And you know, if you ask me, I can sing every song the mamas and papas sang, and every word, and the Beatles, you know. So going back to music that was meaningful to them, and that's highly personal and highly individual, you see a response. There's a wonderful film called Alive Inside. Netflix has it. I think you can get it on other platforms as well. It's a documentary based on the work of Dan Cohen, social worker who created this program. And it's really a wonderful, wonderful program. And it really shows you the power of music to connect and to reach people. And Dan and the organization Music and Memory, Dan is no longer involved, but the Music and Memory, you can find it online. And there's actually a lot of data that they've collected to show the benefits of a personalized music program for people with late stage dementia. So our concerns here are making sure somebody is kept comfortable, maintaining their dignity, and using a palliative approach to care. So, okay, I think let's take a break for a moment, because I've been going, almost an hour. And I just want to see if there are any questions, or put them in the chat. Okay, I would normally at this point ask you to stand up, but you can if you want to. It's a lot of sitting. We say sitting is the new smoking. Yeah, not good. Not good for our health. So, okay, no questions. I'm going to move on. We're going to talk about understanding the differences between the different dementing illnesses, and go into research and then into resources. Okay, everybody ready? Yep, okay. I'll be glad, but we don't do this on Zoom anymore. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so dementia with Lewy bodies is considered by some to be the second most common cause of dementia. Here you have the cognitive challenges similar to Alzheimer's disease, but you're more likely to have early symptoms of sleep disturbance. REM sleep especially is disturbed, visual hallucinations, and Parkinsonian symptoms. So there's some, Lewy bodies is related to, oh, I see a chat, something in the chat. Let me see. Okay, good. Parkinsonian symptoms, the tremors and the muscle rigidity, and sometimes a halting or stumbling step. So let me Okay, whoops, I went the wrong way. Okay, vascular dementia. Here, vascular dementia is the result of really small, either tiny, like mini strokes, multi-infarcts in the brain, some on the level even of microscopic bleeding, and an accumulation of this damage results in how the individual's thinking and physical functioning is affected. And it's actually pretty, I think it's also pretty common. And as I said earlier, I think that, there are some people who will say that vascular dementia is the second leading cause, second most common cause of vascular dementia is the second most common cause of dementia. Frontotemporal degeneration, and I don't know if any of you have ever had FTD patients. Now it's abbreviated as FTD. It includes a wide variety of illnesses and different variants. So we're not going to be able to go into all of them. And there is a wonderful organization that we partner with called the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration. They have a lot of information on their website. We do joint workshops together. We have a support group that that they co-sponsor here in New York. And it's one of our most common. I think it is. So let's start with the description. There's a behavioral variant where the behavior seems to be exaggerated. We'll talk about that in a moment. There's one that affects speech and language called primary progressive aphasia. There's Pick's disease, progressive supranuclear palsy, where there are often falls, and ALS with FTD. So Lou Gehrig's disease, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis with frontotemporal dementia. So typical symptoms include not just the cognitive issues, but changes in personality, more disinhibition, more behavioral symptoms, and difficulty with language, especially if it's the PPA, the primary progressive aphasia. The individual with frontotemporal degeneration might appear more apathetic, less engaged, less initiating of new activities, more impulsive, has lost that screen for kind of social appropriateness, and might say something like, oh, I really hate that tie, or, boy, you've gained weight, something you wouldn't say in a social situation. Might be hypersexuality or hyperorality, where they're putting something in their mouth all the time, either sucking candies or smoking obsessively. It's characterized often by making very bad financial decisions. And because this affects generally individuals who are younger and affects men more, often people can be serious consequences to making bad financial decisions. They also might, steal or take things that are not theirs. It's not really stealing. They just think it's nice. I want it. There's no screen. There's no ability to recognize that that's not the right thing to do. This lack of insight and lack of emotional concern about how their behavior is affecting somebody else. And they also might exhibit poor personal hygiene. They're not showering or washing their hair or using deodorant. So symptoms generally develop at a younger age, and the progression is more rapid than that of Alzheimer's. There are only about 60,000 cases in the US, but it's still, that's a lot of people. And the diagnosis takes longer because people might think it's a psychiatric disorder. Okay, Shira, you have a question?
Yes, thanks. I'm just wondering also, in terms of diagnosis, how would you differentiate whether that person is experiencing behaviors that are deemed to be inappropriate because they're uncomfortable and they just don't have the language to articulate it, versus this being the frontotemporal and it's a different presentation?
Mm-hmm. I think I would, and this is my speculation, is that it would be looking at the entire clinical picture, and that there's more than one of these kinds of typical symptoms of the disease. So put that together with the cognitive changes, with the also change in either job performance or ability to manage finances or household finances, or the household itself. I think that's why this picture is why it is difficult to diagnose, because there's a lot of crossover, but there's an exaggeration, I think, in these symptoms that are not typical of Alzheimer's disease. So often it takes time for that to develop, and that's why it takes longer to get to be diagnosed as well. One of the reasons. Okay. Now, medications. Medication picture is something I always, I often say is, it's a good news, not so good news situation. The good news is that we have medications that can manage the symptoms, but don't modify the disease yet. And so that's the good news, that we have things that can help individuals with the disease. The not so good news is that these medications are not so good. They're better than nothing. And it's something that I recommend that people talk to their primary care doc or their diagnosing doc or treating doc to talk about. But there are three basic categories or classes of medications. One is the cholinesterase inhibitors, Aricept, which is the most popular. It's now in generic form is donepezil, and then Exelon and Razodine, that inhibit the breakdown, that it's a cholinesterase inhibitor. So it inhibits cholinesterase, which breaks down acetylcholine in the blood. So you want to maintain as high a level of acetylcholine as possible in the brain. And then there's the Namenda, which works on another pathway. And then there's a combination of both called Namzaric, which there is some evidence that there's a synergistic effect, and it actually does better. It's more effective. As with all medications, there can be GI, adverse side effects or adverse effects, including GI side effects, sometimes vivid dreams, restless legs, and so forth. Now, the big news was that for the first time in 18 years, we had a new drug approved called Aduhelm. And some of you might have read some of the, news coverage of this. It was on June 7th, 2021, over a year ago. It is not an oral medication, it's an infusion therapy. So you have to go someplace to have that done. It's the first disease-modifying drug approved. So that's actually something I think to be celebrated. However, it was approved under this accelerated approval, meaning that they were looking at non-clinical endpoints, such as the removal of amyloid plaque, and not looking at what the clinical benefits are. Does it slow down the progression of the disease? Does it improve cognition? Does it improve the ability to function independently longer? Those things that are very important to people with the disease and their families. This was a highly controversial approval by FDA, and it resulted in 3 members of the advisory committee leaving the committee. And one of them said, it was like, he said something like, and it's not an exact quote, but it was the worst decision he's seen by the FDA. I'll tell you, there are a lot of people who are out there, and I speak to them every day, that are desperate to find, they're clinging desperately onto the hope that one of these drugs, like Aduhelm, is actually going to work. And so the fact that even it went through this accelerated approval process, they were thrilled, so, who am I to judge? It's, but there is some thinking that maybe this drug, created more problems in the greater scheme of things. And it's also not widely available because Yeah, the continued approval is contingent on confirmatory trials. So you have to go through a phase 4 trial. And then there are some side effects called ARIA, which is this amyloid-related imaging abnormalities. It's kind of brain bleeding and swelling. It sounds very alarming. It could be alarming, but for the most part, it's not that, you know, it doesn't usually cause any symptoms, but can be serious. So it's something that has to be identified through imaging. And then the imaging, there's a cost to that imaging that's not covered for the most part by CMS, unless you're in a trial. And you need that to detect amyloid to see if you're a candidate for the drug in the first place. And then it's needed to detect this adverse effect called ARIA. And the overall cost of the drug was initially $56,000 a year. Well, that's huge. And then it was reduced to $28,000 a year with some evidence that it actually might be less expensive. But it's not widely available because CMS decided, CMS is the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, they would only cover this new drug under coverage with evidence development. And I'm going into all of this for you because I think this has very significant implications for new drugs going forward that are using the same monoclonal antibody approach. And so we are part of an effort to encourage CMS to take a look at each drug on its own merit and not to lump it in with Aduhelm. I think the future of the accessibility to this whole class of drugs is something that's really important. The fact that individuals must enroll in a CMS approved trial or trials supported by NIH, access to trials is a real issue. And part of our role at Caring Kind is to educate individuals about the importance of participating in research trials. But it's still challenging, I think, for many, many individuals to even think about that. And how do you do it? And how do you negotiate it? How do you manage it? And is it inherently discriminatory against African Americans and Latinos who are not generally well represented in research? And we have to do a better job of reaching out and recruiting African Americans and Latinos in biomedical research, and especially in Alzheimer's research. There's still a lot of discussion about this and a lot of thinking about how to make this happen, especially now because, we had done this workshop a month later, I'd have new information for you because there's a big research meeting called CTAD, Clinical Trials for Alzheimer's Disease, which is going to be in San Francisco on November 29th and 30th. And so there were 3 new drugs. Lecanemab is going to be releasing its findings at CTAD. There's some initial reports that I've seen and that they've publicly, distributed that show that it does slow down the progression of the disease by a certain percentage, which is great. But, I'm withholding judgment until the final data are released. There's another drug called donanemab and another called gantenerumab. So all holding some promise. And crenezumab, which was a drug that was used with that cohort of families in Colombia in South America. I don't know if you've heard about them. They were covered on 60 Minutes, I believe, where individuals were diagnosed in their 40s and then they were dead by the time they were in their 50s. And it was clearly a familial form of the disease. And the hope was that by giving this drug early, before somebody was symptomatic, that it could slow down or prevent the cognitive decline in people with the specific genetic mutation, which causes early onset Alzheimer's disease. So anyway, apparently it did not work well. There are other pathways that are being investigated. They're not, all these drugs are working against amyloid. And actually there's been very little evidence that removing amyloid or decreasing amyloid in the brain of somebody who's already symptomatic has any clinical benefit. Doesn't change their thinking, their memory, their functioning. So there's some drugs that are anti-tau drugs. And so one of them is in this lucidity trial, it's called HMTM. There's going to be, again, new data that's going to be released at CTAD in late November. And it has showed some promising results, I think, stabilizing, well, we'll see. And then there's the use of anti-inflammatories, the use of diabetes medications, including Ozempic, and others that show that might be a relationship there. So there are a lot of really intriguing things going on in research. But one of our concerns, one of our major concerns, is that family caregiver who was facing these daunting challenges. And, this was a study that was done several years ago by National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP. That most dementia caregivers perform key tasks such as managing finances and communicating with doctors and advocating on behalf of their care recipient. Caregiving becomes another full-time job. 51% of dementia caregivers provide medical or nursing tasks without proper or appropriate preparation. And unfortunately, healthcare providers ask the caregiver about their needs in only 25% of cases and ask about the needs of the care recipient in close to half of the cases. So I think we need to educate the healthcare community about the importance of caregivers and the role of caregivers as an important partner in providing care and maintaining the health and well-being of the individual with dementia. Caregiving has profound effects, and I always say that unless you've done it, you don't really understand what it's like to do this 24/7, every day of the year. It is exhausting. It is draining. It can be fulfilling. Don't get me wrong, especially if you do it well. But it's also, one of the things that we promote at Caring Kind is really making sure that that caregiver is taking care of him or herself, and that self-care is not selfish, that self-care is critical, because in order for you to continue to provide care, you have to be healthy and well in both, physically and emotionally and mentally. So we know that the emotional response for caregivers, there's a greater rate of anxiety, depression, social isolation, much greater rates of stress when compared with other caregivers of non-Alzheimer's type, and the sense of living in grief, this frozen sadness, because you're watching somebody change and you are helpless to prevent it. So that feeling of helplessness and the feeling of hopelessness, which is something I hope that we can counteract, because we've learned so much about providing good care for the individual with dementia and for that caregiver. You can't separate the two. Clearly, about a third of caregivers have symptoms of clinical depression. And for many people, that sense of looking back at who that individual was and who they are now is very painful. The person who was that middle school teacher all of his life and coached the basketball team, and now, doesn't know what to do with the basketball, or can't, add a column of numbers or do the checkbook or do the things that he always did. It's very painful. They're constant reminders of the losses. The other area that we see caregivers are impacted is just the physical impact that they are. As I said, I think exhaustion is one of the number one things I hear from caregivers. They're just, drained. They're the greater reports of fatigue, reduced immune function, higher rates of new hypertension and new heart disease, more doctor visits, more likely to report that their health is fair or poor, more emergency room visits and hospitalization. And unfortunately, older spousal caregivers might predecease the person with dementia. And there's some evidence that spousal caregivers are at greater risk for dementia themselves, probably related to the ongoing stress of providing care. There's also caregivers live in often, they are part of a family and family conflict arises. There is the brother who lives in Colorado, and daughter is here in the Bronx caring for her mom, and son gets on the phone with mom and she sounds fine. And it isn't until he is invited to come and spend a weekend with mom that he really gets what happens. She's up in the middle of the night. She's going through the fridge. She's trying to get out in the middle of the night. She's confused. She's combative. Don't pick that up on a phone call. So I remember this quote from one of our caregivers for an early onset wife, who said that he felt like he was picked up by a tornado and he never knew where he was going to land. And because we're working in a system where there really isn't a rational long-term care system in place, people are terrified about how am I going to pay for this? And part of our role with our community partners is to educate families about the legal and financial planning that needs to happen so that people can benefit from the programs that are there to provide support for families like this. Over 11 million Americans provide unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's and other dementias at an estimated value of $257 billion. Huge contribution. Now, I love this quote. Mother Teresa, who you're all familiar with, said, "God doesn't give us more than we can handle. Sometimes I wish God didn't have so much confidence in me." And I think so many caregivers feel this. How much more can I take? And I remember speaking to one caregiver many years ago who told me before she wakes up in the morning, she kind of says a little silent prayer that her husband has disappeared, because she did not know how much more she could possibly take. And did she have the strength to go on? Thankfully, she was in our support group. She was coming to the education meeting. She found community and support here, and she was able to continue and provide care and, importantly, accept help, because this is something that you cannot do alone. And that's a message we send to our caregivers. This is something that's going to be bigger than you. No matter how strong, how intelligent, how connected, how many resources you have in terms of, not only financial, but more importantly, support resources. I think it's, this is a very kind of common feeling. I wish God didn't have so much confidence in me to keep doing this. Another wonderful quote from a woman named Olivia Ames Hobletzel, who wrote a book called 10,000 Joys and 10,000 Sorrows, a couple's journey through Alzheimer's disease. She is a Buddhist teacher, and she talked about entering his reality, and something that we teach in our family caregiver workshops as well. But also recognizing that she can let go and love at the same time, this paradoxical place where you can still love the person you're caring for, but you have to let go in a way so that you can continue to care for yourself, and so that you attend to your needs as well. I think it's actually a beautiful, beautiful quote. I can let go and love at the same time. So caregiving, is complicated. It's filled with a lot of tedious things, including, a lot of applying for things and administrative tasks that are challenging. So what can you do in the community? One is, I think, encourage people who you're seeing changes in how they're functioning, how they're managing independently, encourage an early diagnosis, because we know the earlier people are diagnosed and connected to supportive services, the better they do in the end. Assist them with legal and financial and long-term care planning, and help educate them. And something that we do very well here at Caring Kind, and you can certainly refer them to us, and I'll show you how to do that. And then to engage and help create the support system for that family, and reinforce that message that you cannot do this alone. And support quality of life, both for that person with dementia, PWD is person with dementia, and the care partner. And to promote purpose and meaning for both. And there's more opportunities now for people in the early stage to have their voices heard and to participate in focus groups, in public dialogue, in programs. And I'll talk to you about some of the newer programs we have for people with early stage. So Caring Kind, we were formerly the Alzheimer's Association New York City chapter. We parted companies. We predate the Alzheimer's Association. We were one of the founding chapters of the organization, and then parted company in December of 2015 and rebranded as Caring Kind, the heart of Alzheimer's caregiving. So we work very cooperatively with the Alzheimer's Association. We're good friends there. But our work is really focused on delivering these kinds of programs and services to people with the disease and caregivers, and yet still the advocacy and research and supportive research and interest in research is very much part of our mission. So for caregivers, the most important number they can have is that helpline number, 646-744-2900. We answer the phones in English and Spanish. We have Chinese speaking staff, and we have translation services into, I think, 200 languages. So no matter who is calling, we can provide some support. We have social work services, which helps people understand the long-term care planning issues. I'll go into what all of these are: the support groups, the education and training, the medical alert wanderer safety program, which is so critical, and our palliative care for advanced dementia program is really, we have some new materials for that as well for families. And then for people living with dementia, we have two kind of buckets of programs. One is our Connect to Culture program, which I'll talk to you about, and our ACL. We got a grant to expand our early stage programs, bring back some of our early stage programs, which had closed because of COVID. COVID had a huge effect, a disproportionate effect on individuals with dementia who were at greater risk for developing COVID and for their caregivers. And remember, it's a group that's in a high risk category, just being the age that they are. We are New York City's trusted partner in dementia care. We've been here for over 40 years. All of our services are offered free of charge, except for one, but we have a scholarship program if somebody can't afford it. That's our bracelet identification program. And we collaborate. We don't do this work alone. We work with many organizations like JASA and like the Road, which I've seen here. I don't know where the rest of you are from, but yeah. So anyway, that's, we don't do this. We work with adult day programs, we work with the diagnostic centers, we work with home care, and we work with residential care programs. Our role is really to increase community awareness, both of the disease, but also of the resources that are out there. People don't know where to turn for help. Central address for dementia care is right here at Caring Kind, and then we can refer and connect people to their community local resources as well, that we work with. And we provide this direct service, what I like to call a roadmap to care and a pathway to hope. And people are so glad when they call that helpline. And they often say, you know what, I'm so sorry I didn't do this 5 years ago. We build on a foundation of education and training, giving people information about the disease and about how to manage the disease. Yeah, I'll talk about our reach in a few minutes. We are primarily a New York City-based organization that has a national reach. So we have called caregivers who connect to us, participate, and we have people with early stage who participate in our programs from all over the greater metro area, as well as, all over the country. But I think the best way to define it is that we're New York City based. We've been here a long time. We have deep roots in New York City, but the information, and then we can refer people to local services in their community if they need more local resources. And we have a long history of developing model programs and innovative programs of care. Okay, so we start with the helpline. That's that number, 646-744-2900. I hope you'll have it memorized by the time I'm done this afternoon. And here families can speak with a caring professional about their concerns, learn more about dementia and memory loss and Alzheimer's, and get connected and discover the resources that are available in the community. And it's also available to you, the professional. So we get a lot of professionals in the community who are dealing with a particularly challenging behavior issue or with a particularly challenging entitlement issue. Medicare has refused home care for that individual in New York, or whatever it might be. So we're here to provide that kind of support. This is actually in our heyday when we actually had a lot of people in the office. We don't anymore. We're working on a hybrid. I'm in the office today, but we're working on a hybrid schedule. So this is actually the helpline, and you can see folks answering the call there. We're very fortunate to have licensed master social workers who are experienced in geriatrics and in dementia care. We provide a wide variety of support through our social work services. One is providing that short-term counseling and helping people deal with the emotional impact. Now, if somebody needs ongoing individual mental health counseling, we will refer to partners to do that. But if it has to do with these specific issues of dementia and dementia care, and helping somebody reconcile or understand what their role is and develop new tools to help them provide that care for their individual and for themselves, that's really our role. And also going into the benefits and entitlements, looking at the long-term care system, Medicaid planning and paying for care. And still in New York City, I know it's hard to believe, we can get people, 12-hour care, even 24-hour care, using the Medicaid system, using the nursing home transition and diversion waiver program. So there's, options here that can help people pay for long-term care. We do help with family conflict assistance. So we work with mediation organizations if that level of intervention is necessary. But we can do some basic family conflict resolution. And we also help negotiate that individual who was a long distance caregiver. I remember somebody who was living in Oregon, but her aunt was alone in Brooklyn. And we were able to help that niece, get services for her aunt in Brooklyn and communicate, and it really helped. And once we went virtual with our meetings, she could come to a family caregiver workshop online. She could come to an understanding dementia workshop online. And then, as I said, we refer to a whole host of community services. And then on a very limited basis, and I almost took this out because we don't have very much of that anymore, but we do have some programs that will provide financial assistance for families for very limited, for a specific time. There has to be a long-term plan. And if we can help pay for adult daycare or home care for a short period of time while somebody is planning for Medicaid, or if they need, some people need a specific thing like an air conditioner. Some people have run out of, we've dealt with families that have brought a relative up from South Carolina. I remember when there was people who were coming over from Haiti after the earthquake, and they didn't have any, winter clothes, and we were able to help that person with dementia get some, basic necessities. Again, these are small, modest grants, and so that's available on a limited basis. Let me put it that way. Okay. Our support groups. I think of all of the programs. I know all of the programs are important, but the support groups represent, I think, that program that I hear more from families, that it's because they were able to participate in our support groups, that they were able to keep their head above water, that they felt understood in a way that they didn't in any other area of their life. Our groups are a little bit different from kind of the national norm. Our group leaders are all professionally trained and supervised, and they go through a significant number of hours of training. Our groups meet minimally twice a month. Some meet weekly. They are not open groups. They are closed groups. People have to be interviewed for them. And people need to make a commitment to the group, after finding that it's the right group for them. We have groups that are specifically geared to different cohorts. We have spouses groups, we have adult daughter groups, we have adult children's group, we have groups in English, and we have groups clearly in Spanish and Chinese. We have a fairly new group in the Orthodox Jewish community. We have groups with the LGBT community that we do in partnership with SAGE. And so we're always looking to expand that and to grow the number of groups. And because of COVID, actually, we've opened the groups to be virtual. People are not meeting in person. And so they're really open to a larger number of people who can benefit from it. The groups provide the safe, welcoming environment to deal with the issues of being a caregiver. Not a place to learn about long-term care, not a place to learn about some of the other things that they can learn about in other ways, but they are emotionally focused. And I think that's what makes them a little bit different from some of the other support groups or the other support group models. Look, there are many roads to Rome. There are lots of ways to do this, but ours are not open drop-in groups. They are really closed groups. People make a commitment to coming to the group and can benefit not only by sharing what they are experiencing, but from hearing from others. And those connections that are made in the group are really profound and meaningful to those support group members. Here's a gentleman, Ted Comet, who wrote an article for us about why he, what was the benefit of being in the support group. Some of his quotes, he said, it preserved his sanity, countering aloneness and despair, the only place he could openly express his pain, loss, and anger, gaining valuable insights and direction. And I remember him saying, who am I going to cry to? My kids, or my colleagues. He was still working full-time in his 80s. Remarkable man. One of our support group rooms, again, now they're all virtual, so you're in a virtual support group room actually at the moment. So I really encourage you to let people know about the support groups, and I'll show you a way that you can refer clients here very simply. Education is the foundation of caring kind, giving people clear, current information so that they understand what's happening in the disease and they understand what resources and services are available to them. We do this in a variety of ways. We do monthly education meetings on various topics like activities, communication, bathing. We do some on specifically dealing with Lewy body dementia, dealing with FTD, frontotemporal dementia, and various other topics. And then understanding dementia is the meeting that we're doing now. I'm doing it for you as professionals. We do a more abbreviated one for family caregivers. And we do these meetings in English and Spanish and Chinese. We also do legal and financial planning seminars where we have an elder law attorney who runs these meetings and goes into the issues of planning for care, being able to doing things like durable power of attorney and healthcare proxy and all of those issues. And we also do a meeting just on Medicaid home care and how to apply for Medicaid home care in New York City. And those monthly education meetings I've talked about. We also occasionally do a meeting about moving your relative to a nursing home or other assisted living. And when we were doing meetings in person, we were doing them in all the boroughs. Hopefully we'll get back there at some point. But beyond these education meetings, we do more in-depth trainings where we really are looking to not only increase knowledge as in the education meetings, but really build skills and develop the skill of dementia care, both for that family caregiver and for dementia care training for professionals, for home care workers and CNAs and others. So that is actually our training center, which is lovely. And now being used a little bit more as we're doing more and more in person. This is a program that I'm actually going to put on hold for a moment. We need some cleaning up, but we had created a website so that people who are looking for private pay home care workers can find somebody who's been trained by Caring Kind. Over COVID and the pandemic, this really needs some more attention, but hopefully we will resurrect this. So really important program. This is the Medical Alert New York City Wanderer Safety Program. As I said, people with dementia can and will wander. Probably 70% of people will wander at one point or another during the disease. 50% of people with dementia will suffer severe injury or death if not recovered within 24 hours. This is a national safety registration program. Everybody who is memory or cognitively impaired should be enrolled in this program. We provide ID bracelets for persons with dementia and for their caregivers, many of whom are elderly. And if they have a heart attack, taken to the hospital, and they're scared to death about who's going to care for my husband, they can, they'll see the bracelet, call the number, and the program will contact the next person on the list of individuals who will respond. So we also have a very proactive program. When somebody is missing, we can send a bulletin, emailing it mostly now to hospitals, shelters, EMS, police precincts, transit and medical examiner's office, Port Authority, etc., when a person is reported lost. And we have this long history of working with the NYPD and the media to report when somebody is missing. We have a detective who's assigned to us, which is great. That relationship has been around since the early 90s. And most importantly, we provide support for that family because, as you can imagine, having somebody missing in the middle of New York City, whether you're in Brooklyn and Coney Island, or whether you're in Queens on Queens Boulevard, or, and you look out the door and you think, well, where the hell could he have gone? And they just disappear. And it is a terrifying feeling. So we, at our peak where we were enrolling, 1,000 clients annually, we'll get back up there. We do a lot of different conferences. We have one coming up, which I'll talk to you about in a few minutes, on November 21st. You're welcome to attend. We do an annual meeting on caregiving. And this has been on hold, and I hope to bring this back, or Keeping Faith in Mind, a program for chaplains and clergy. And we do programs on our palliative care seminars. And then within our outreach programs, we've done brain health community awareness events in the Chinese, African American, and Latino communities. And I hope to do one in the Orthodox community soon, or at some point. And our other program that I mentioned to you earlier is that Connect to Culture, where we work with, educate the cultural and arts and organizations in New York City, both fine arts and performing arts and horticultural arts. So we have many, many programs. These are really wonderful, wonderful resource for families with dementia, both for the individual with dementia and their caregiver. We've done some programs specifically for caregivers or only for caregivers. And I encourage you to look at our website at caringkind.nyc.org/connect2culture. That's the numeral 2 culture. And then you can see programs that are available online at your, whenever you want them. So that's really good. Okay. One of our, Shira, yes.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, just a quick plug because I happen to be holding the flyer in hand. Connect to Culture has a Hanukkah Tradition and Memories program coming up during Hanukkah, Wednesday, December 7th, over at Eldridge Street, Museum Eldridge Street. So putting a plug, it's one of many, but worth noting.
Okay, great. And I think we'll send that out when we send out the questionnaires. Thank you, Shira. So Shira's a staff member here, been working with us actually over the years and is now here on a more regular basis, formal. So thank you. The diversity outreach programs are, D&I programs. Our efforts are designed to extend our programs and services to culturally diverse populations, including the African American, Latino, Chinese, LGBT, and Orthodox Jewish communities. We've created appropriate informational materials, both online and hard copy, and offer educational sessions to community members and professionals in Spanish and Chinese. There are so many myths and barriers around discussing Alzheimer's disease in every one of these communities. I remember speaking to somebody in the African American community who said to me, I was brought up to think that it was that only whites got Alzheimer's disease, that we didn't have to worry about it, when in actuality, African Americans are double the risk of developing dementia. So, there's a lot of barriers, and there's a lot of work being done with our staff to create trusting relationships. And we've made great strides in all of these communities. And most recently, a couple of years ago, we were approached, actually many years ago, I was approached by a social worker in the Jewish community who said, our families need your information and programs. They're very insular. They're not going to reach out. Can you come to Brooklyn? And I don't know how many years ago, this was maybe 10 or 12. And I came out and there were like 400 people in the audience, separated male and female, men and women. And it was, the need was so palpable. And so finally, we've gotten some support to have an Orthodox Jewish outreach social worker. And now we've added Shira to help with that effort. So the need is tremendous.
May I interrupt?
Yes, please.
Sir?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Rabbi Ellen Blank. I'm the Vice President of Professional Development and External Affairs for Rabbinical Alliance of America. And we were very honored to have done a very special webinar presentation with Adina Siegel, who is right. She did a marvelous presentation, and this is for our membership and others, rabbis, rabbis, and chaplains of over 950 members throughout the United States.
Wow.
And it was very successful. We are in the planning stages of doing other programs as well for the Orthodox Jewish community. So we have tremendous appreciation for Adina Siegel and for your caring kind. And we hope to be doing more planning as well. So I just wanted to shout out about Adina Siegel of what she's been doing. And she was marvelous, and we got tremendous, wonderful reviews. And as I said, we are continuing to do this for the Orthodox community. So we thank you very, very much.
That's terrific. Our pleasure. And we hope to be doing more of that. So yes, I always, I often say that we're the kind of best kept secret, and it's good for people to know about our services and to take advantage. So we do these kind of large community events, like the one that Rabbi Blank just mentioned, and this was taken a couple of years ago when people were still meeting in person downtown in Chinatown. We had a brain health awareness event. We had something like 350 Chinese seniors, many of whom were caregivers, and were learning about maintaining brain health and the resources and services available through the community. We had many community partners there. So it was really a great event. And one of the ways that you can help us, and I'll be sending this out to you when we send out the questionnaires, is that we have a form called Caring Kind Connection. So it's a simple form that you can email or fax back to us. And so if you have a client that is interested, that could benefit from our services, and rather than, we also have a prescription pad, and you can give them that information, but that puts the onus on the caregiver to take the next step and call us. This gives us, they sign a permission for us to contact them. And then one of our dementia care specialists will contact them within 48 hours, and we'll see how we can help them. So it's really, it's healthcare professionals, whether you're social workers or nurses, or I'm not, what your roles are, you're welcome to use this Caring Kind Connection form. It's also available online at caringkindnyc.org. Just look under the professionals tab and you'll see it there, but we'll send it to you. So, okay, let me move on because I think we're running out of time. We are. So the other program I mentioned to you very briefly was the Dementia Capable Palliative and Residential Care Program, where we worked, this is 10 years ago in the making, where we worked with 3 nursing homes who are now accredited in something called Comfort Matters, which brings this model of palliative care for people with dementia, improving quality of life for that individual, reducing use of antipsychotic medications, greater staff satisfaction. So we did an extensive evaluation of this program. And I would suggest that we're looking to, we created a manual for residential care facilities, but last year we created a manual for families who have relatives in residential care. And so we can send you that link as well. It's called Finding Comfort. And so when our original guidelines were released, over 2,000 were distributed 6 years ago. And we also are now working with our first public nursing home. Kohler has adopted the Comfort Matters program and is accredited in that. So a couple of words just about, Stephanie, did you have a question or? No, I guess not. Okay. So just, I thought by 2022, we didn't need to talk about COVID anymore, but here we are. I just want to remind you that people with dementia are twice as likely to get infected. And African Americans with Alzheimer's disease and related disorders are 3 times as likely to get infected. Most likely due to the high degree of pre-existing risk factors in those populations. Reports of greater stress for caregivers. And we were part of a survey that Us Against Alzheimer's, or USA2, did. And there was clearly reports of greater decline for the person with dementia and a more rapid decline, because all of the supports that people relied upon in the community were cut off from them. So, and again, and as you remember, for individuals who had families in nursing homes, it was like being in limbo because they couldn't visit. And let me remind you that a visit from a family member to a person in late stage Alzheimer's in a nursing home is not just a friendly visit. Often it's hands-on care that they're providing. They're providing support for that, for the individual, but also for the nursing home staff. So it really was a time of tremendous distress for caregivers and for people with the disease. We know that the burden of care was intensified during COVID, during the height of COVID. Isolation was heightened by those, lockdown orders. There was a lot of worry about what if the caregiver gets sick or dies first, and what if a person with dementia gets infected. And people were terrified of going to the nursing home or to the hospital. And there was this, we were all in this environment of unrelenting grief and loss. We were seeing, pictures of, trucks that were filled with bodies. And for caregivers who were now stuck at home with their individual, there was no break, no relief from caregiving. It was really difficulty. And as I mentioned earlier, there was definite evidence of the person with dementia declining more rapidly. So we have created, and we still have this online, that there are great resources and tips and some wonderful interactive activities which are appropriate anytime, which you can take a look at on our website under our COVID-19 resources, caringkind.nyc.org/COVID-19-resources. Okay. Now, as I said, we collaborate with a lot of partners, and we're proud to be a subcontractor on an NYU Langone National Institute on Aging grant to promote health education among older adults, but also increasing participation in clinical research. It's called the ELM Project, and you can find this online as well. And we're focusing on diverse communities and working with our partners at DIFTA and the Aging in New York Fund. So this comes out of NYU Langone, and it's an interesting project, part of a much larger national effort to encourage older adults to participate in research, because a lot of the drugs that have been approved really have not been tested on older adults, and yet who uses most of the drugs? Older adults. So what can I tell you? Brand new program here, MAP, Memory Advocate Peer Program, is piloted at Caring Kind. We've recruited our first 3 or 4 individuals with dementia and their caregivers. These are recently diagnosed individuals that are paired with a volunteer who is an experienced mentor, who's a former caregiver, to provide emotional support, to connect with community resources, and educate about and facilitate participating in Alzheimer's research. So if you're interested, you can contact, if you know any former clients, caregivers who would be interested in becoming a mentor, you can contact Marcia Henney at 646-744-2937. And I'll have these slides available for you later on. This is just our flyer about the MAP program. And lastly, almost lastly, as I've mentioned, we've been funded by the Administration on Community Living to expand our programs for early stage and to family caregivers. And so we've started with something called cognitive stimulation therapy, which is a program that runs twice a week for, I think, 6 weeks or 8 weeks, something like that. And it's interactive cognitive stimulation. People absolutely love it. It's for people in the early stage or MCI. This is an evidence-based program. We're also going to be delivering an evidence-based training to family caregivers, which we've started already, to build skills in behavioral symptom management. It's a one-on-one program. It's not a group program. And we're doing some training to direct care providers, people living with dementia with intellectual disability. And so that's to help them become a more dementia capable workforce. So I invite you all to sign up for our annual meeting on research, which is the evening of November 21st. It'll be both in person or by Zoom. We're going to be talking about emerging trends in Alzheimer's disease, kind of what do we really know about risk reduction? What about these new treatments that I've told you about? Is this really hope, or is it hyped? And then what are our, what are Caring Kind's new programs for persons living with dementia? So it's actually is a good follow-up. We have some terrific speakers, one from the Alzheimer's Association, Matt Baumgart, who's also head of the BOLD initiative for Alzheimer's risk reduction, and Sarah Lenslock from AARP, and Dr. Noble from Columbia, and my colleague Stephanie Shivers here, who handles our ACL programs. So I think I did this about, yeah, reminding you that we are 95% or more privately supported, and we do a variety of activities. We just had our walk on Sunday. We had, I know, it was like 600 people in the park. We've done well. It was a great day. The rain held off. It was a lot of fun. And we do a lot of athletic events to support our activities here. So let me remind you that if you are interested in getting the CEUs, to contact 646-744-2900 and ask about CEUs for the Understanding Dementia for Professionals program that was held today, and we'll send you some information. We'll be doing a follow-up email with you. So I'm going to send you some other information on some of the programs, and also that Connect to Caring Kind Connections program. So we have I'm going to stop sharing our program here. There we are. All right. Any other questions, thoughts, comments before we stop in a few minutes?
Could you repeat the number? I'm sorry.
Sure. It's 646-744-2900. Yes, and I will send your regards to Adina, who's I know does a terrific job.
Thank you. And thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, my pleasure. Other thoughts? Questions? It's a lot to sit through 2 hours of this. I know you've been remarkably attentive. At least I think you've been attentive. I can't tell because I don't see you. All right, I'm going to give you back 2 minutes of, oh, Jessica, do you have a?
I have here 4 pages of notes.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Great.
It was very a nice class. I learned a lot of definitions too that I didn't know of.
Good, good. Where do you work?
RSS. It's like a senior center,
Mhm,
and I work with Alzheimer patients.
mhm. Is that in Riverdale or?
Yeah, Riverdale.
Great.
Yeah, and
Excellent.
a couple of things that you've mentioned, I do see the symptoms of the clients,
Mhm,
specifically like aphasia and
mhm,
a lot of the names that that my boss had told me about as well.
mhm. Good. Okay.
Wanted to
So
say
thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. I'm going to give you, now I'm not going to give you back 2 minutes because we've used them up. Stephanie, thank you. Okay, everybody.
thank you.
You're welcome.
It was very enlightening. I learned a lot as well. I
Great.
have a lot to be able to support and information to take back to my patients as well. So thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. That's the idea. Very good, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Okay. Thank you all. Bye.